once, £2,000.
Wow.
Anyway, so Katie just pushed the button to say that we're live. I never like to sort of quite kick off immediately because you never know while people are still coming in. But I will start by saying, and hope that people hear it, Peter, welcome. Thank you very, very much for coming and having this conversations with that. I have to say, I thoroughly enjoy every once a month meeting fascinating people I already know, people I've got to know, have worked with. And you are, I don't know where you are, you must be about the 10th or 11th, but you're another one who's passionate about leadership. And of course, I only speak to people who are passionate about leadership.
Yep.
So I never know where the questions are going to go. They'll go wherever they take us. But I think the first thing that's really important is if you could share a little bit about you and almost a bit about your background, as though you're doing an introduction as you normally would do, but also tell people a little bit about where your leadership journey actually started, where you began to, if you like, see leadership as something that was really important to you, or you got an understanding of its importance either. But I think people would love to know a little bit about your background, where you came from, and how you got to where you are today.
Okay, I'm happy to jump in on that. So I think the best way I'm a sort of, obviously, a combination of my mother and my father. I'm pleased to say that at this age in my life. And I think how I explain that is my father was in the army, which is why I had this ridiculous accent. So I was sent away to a boarding school at a very young age, blah, blah, blah. And I think sort of that was a strong force in my life. And I was brought up on the barracks. And I think I'll come back to that. But I think the impact of the army and the importance of leadership was pretty much something I picked up on from a very young age. And I used to walk around the barracks with him and everything else. And I didn't know it at the time. My mother, by the way, to complete the story, I got my sort of personality, my character from her. And her family were entrepreneurs and actually had a lovely sort of wine and hotel business up in the northeast of England. So that was another part of my life. And therefore, one of the reasons I come onto my career, but it explains a lot. So, expensive school, went to a good university, followed my father, I think, for the first point of my career, joined large corporates, and therefore was just sort of building ranks, really, without being too specific about it. Ended up, the big one was at Vodafone for 11 years, ended up, helping run a foreign country, came back to the UK. So ended up being sort of, reasonably successful in a big corporate, and I enjoyed it. But I then actually got to a moment in my life when I hit 40, when I realized I wasn't as happy as I thought I would be. And actually the Living Leader program teaches you a lot about that. And I gave up corporate life to then do my own thing, which was very much my mum's side of the world. And I'm very glad I did it. But the thing that I carried through that was basically my kind of passion for managing teams and leading people. And I'd sort of been doing that on and off all the way through my childhood, is in these ridiculous schools and sort of heads of house and heads of sports teams and everything else. But it's only when you join the dots up you realize you like it as much as you did. Penny, it was all going fine until I got to virtually 50. I'd bought up a company. I'm scaling it up, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. And then I went to a sort of telephone conference. They're thrilling things, I can assure you, up in Scotland. And your friend Paul Stobart stood up and said, as was then in those days, and gave a speech about the difference between leadership and management, and how important it is. And he then mentioned your name. I then met you. And I think I needed that sort of wake up call. I got to a point when things were going well in my life and my career, but I probably was not going stale, but I'd stopped learning and growing. And what I've done since then, that was 3 or 4 years ago, is obviously enter this conversation in terms of Living Leader. I then trained to be a trainer. I've trained my company on it. I've scaled my company using Living Leader and all the stuff I learned on this course. So it's changed my life, but also the shape of my business as well. So that gives you a reasonable summary. So life started in corporate sales and marketing. I think I've got to where I wanted to, which is focusing on using the leadership skills to build organizations.
Yeah, I mean, it is interesting. And you certainly did have a really quite unusual background, having one side army and on the other side an entrepreneur. I mean, that's a hell of a combination.
Yeah, and
Um,
I think like everyone, I mean, having done your program, you've got to understand who you are and where you come from, good and bad. And I just that those were forces shaping my life, and I just needed to understand them. And so I always say to people, I have two regrets. One is not reading history at university, which I can recover quite quickly. But the second one is not joining the army. I really regret it. And therefore, sort of now over-indexing on leadership is probably sort of coming to terms with that and just spending more time on it.
what do you think the army would have given you that makes you say, I wish I'd joined the army?
It's hard. They don't need to fill in net promoter scores and people surveys. You've got, I mean, everyone, I mean, it's not a perfect organization, and I won't pretend it is, but honestly, I just being brought up around it, the sense of camaraderie and commitment. I mean, it's in the DNA. And therefore, just being in an environment that values it so much. And also the bit that I think I've realized the more I've been dialing up my history the last few years is the difference between the more senior you are, you have to set direction, but you don't tell people how to do their jobs. You let them get on with it, and you empower them, and you get them to the point, you give them all the tools they need to succeed, but you don't patronize them, tell them how to run their lives day to day. And that, I think, is often in businesses where there's just too much micromanagement rather than leadership. And I think, hopefully that answers the question. In army, you see real leadership. They're not telling you they're telling you that they want you to achieve that objective, but not telling you how to get there.
And is Vodafone the only big corporate that you really spent time in?
No, I did a few. I sort of skipped over that. I did GlaxoSmithKline, I did Unilever, I did Kraft Foods, which is now sort of, I guess, Mondelez or Kraft Heinz, it's split. So I did 3 big ones on the way. And then I also did a startup. I was very early days on the internet. So I did a company called Self-Trade. I set up an online stockbroking business just as the internet was being born. And I think that I then sort of got married and had my first child. And I think I loved it, but I then sort of went back into big corporates, but I knew I needed to go back and sort of do the entrepreneur thing again. And I'm really glad I did it.
So just tell me, it's really interesting what you said about the army and empowering people. So you've now worked in quite a few big corporates, big names that many would have heard of. And I'm not asking you to sort of specify one or anything, but how much of empowerment did you see in the big corporates?
Ironically, a fair bit. I mean, Vodafone probably less so. There was a very sort of, when I was there was a very strong sort of, you could call it leadership culture, but the people in charge were meant to be kind of all over the micro detail, very, very heavily involved. And so there was, the one I actually look back on warmly, what was my first marketing job was at Kraft, where we went on, I found the folder recently, went on a course, and it's, leading and managing by continuous improvement, LMCI. And I found the folder, obviously gathering dust on a shelf at home, and it's brilliant. And that there, as a little brand manager, age 24, I was taught to go to the factory and deal with people and show, just get other people to run around on stuff. That was a magnificent business. I mean, it's a long time ago. And Unilever was good as well. So I think they're just big organizations. I think they have to let the middle managers and middle leaders operate. Otherwise, I think wouldn't exist. So they're not quite as bad as I thought they were at the time. But I think they're hard organizations to change from within.
Yeah, I think with big corporates, I think you're right. And it's not easy, and it so depends on who it is you've got at the very top. So depends, because people just take on board, even though they're not aware of it, the behaviors and the characteristics of the person at the top. And that makes it really quite difficult. And I think also the thing that makes it difficult is, I find it fascinating the way you've described the army, because in many ways it's not the way we're brought up. A lot of the time at school or everywhere, you're being told what to do all the time.
Yep.
And it's all about learning, but you're not told or taught how to almost think for yourself. So it's kind of interesting that you then step in the business world. And my experience of a lot of people in the corporate world is I don't like using these words, but I don't know how else to put it. They get it wrong. They're not leading because they're trying so hard to help people. And they feel that their role is helping and telling people what to do.
And I think also because often in most organizations, you're trying to justify your value, and therefore you're trying to add too much value, which is you're trying to contribute too much. And actually, I remember I couldn't believe it when a friend of mine said to me, he's since gone on to own an incredibly successful PE business. So he's done pretty well. And his comment was, my goal in life, Pete, is to make myself redundant. And I thought he was just being indolent and lazy. I'm like, how dare you say that? And I had a sort of strong Victorian work ethic, but he's sort of right as a leader. You're trying to do, the less you do, the more other people are doing, and they probably get more satisfaction and engagement, and they're probably better at it. But I think we're taught that we have to sort of we've all got a price on our back or a number on our, and that we've got to sort of justify ourselves, and that's not how leadership should work. You should be justifying it by the teams that you're building behind you that can, and actually the less you do rather than the more you do. But it's counterintuitive that actually you want leaders to step back more rather than step forward.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you hit the nail on the head. So Peter, if you look back 10 years, can you remember what your vision was then?
Well, that's a good question. Actually, that's a good one, because at that point, I had a bit of a time running a taxi company in London that was quite colourful. But I knew 10 years ago, that was my moment. Actually, my mum sadly died relatively young. And it was at that moment when I had a moment in your life when I realised I wasn't happy in corporate life. So if you'd asked that number either way, probably not. But at that particular moment, I knew I wanted to change something about my life. I had very happily married, 3 gorgeous children, but I just wasn't deep down happy, and I had to stare at it going, why not? And I just realized I was going down the wrong path, and I needed to go off and do my own thing and stop chasing ranks and grades in corporates. So at that point, the vision was, now I'm lucky, I think I've delivered a lot of that. And my regret probably is I should have realized that a bit sooner. And you often go into your 30s, into your 40s, and you sort of just get carried away with life. You're getting married, you're having children, your career's at full speed, and you're just so busy being and doing, you're not really looking forwards very far.
Yeah. I'm curious though, if you think of your vision 10 years ago, how closely have you moved towards it?
Oh, like 80%. Scary.
It's pretty good, isn't it?
But the problem is, being able to sort of be quite broad brush about it. But yes, no, I'm chuffed to bits, and it was all about, making sure my children are brought up in a nice way, and they're their own, stand on their own 2 feet. And you learn this on the program, right? You just know what people don't have them. And actually, and I think I said to you when I last met you that there's I will find this stat out correctly, but I was quoted by a previous mentor of mine that something like 80% of people don't get promoted after the age of 40. So you get to an age in your life when you're not very mature, actually, but you think you are. You've got maximum complexity in terms of your parents are probably aging, your children are getting quite complicated and teenagery, and people just stop planning and stop thinking. They just get so consumed in the day-to-day. And probably the time to write a vision is 30 and 40, not 50. And I'm lucky I did, but something changed in my life to force me to confront some realities. I think a lot of people don't do that, and they just let life just happen to them.
You've got to be careful what you say here, Peter. My vision, I didn't start till 50.
There we are. Well, maybe, yes, I know, exactly. But I think that's the point. You don't stop, but I know you well enough now. You've never stopped learning and growing. And I think I've finally read that growth mindset book recently. It's brilliant. And I think I wish I'd realized that earlier. You just have the confidence to keep planning forwards, but accept that those plans are a series of assumptions, and you've got to hold on to it quite lightly. If you try and run your life too tightly by that, you end up sort of not enjoying the moment, if you will. But I think it's important to know roughly where you're headed. You don't need to know in fine detail, but roughly where you're headed and why.
I think you're absolutely right there. And I think sometimes people confuse vision with objectives. Vision is exactly as you describe it. It's loosely held. You've got to focus, a lot about what you want, but it's not a set of objectives, and it is different. Otherwise, I agree with you. I think exactly as you put it, you're so focused on achieving your objectives, you don't live in the present. And that makes it very
And
difficult.
often as well, and I've watched that because I've now taught the course with my team. They often people sort of they write visions, but it's all money and it's all. I sort of understand it and bigger house and all of that stuff, but I just think you've got to, they're not. Well, maybe it's me different. I don't think that's what fulfills you that much. I mean, they're important hygiene and table stakes. Don't get me wrong. You've got to live somewhere, but I think sometimes it's also about being, making you a happier person. And I'm not sure how having an extra bathroom or bedroom is really going to do that, but who am I to judge these things?
Yeah, I think everything you're saying there makes sense. Let me just ask you. I wonder, it'd be quite interesting for people who are listening to hear this. After you did the program the first time,
Yep.
what are the behaviors, even with all the background you had around leadership and everything, what were the behaviors you actually looked to either change or develop after you'd done the program?
Well, funnily enough, which means nothing to people on the rest of the program, but this book is green in colour, Penny. You remember Mr. Rackham? I had to buy a book to remind myself day to day to be less blue and a bit more green, if you will. So I think just my view of life and my communication style and just stepping back and giving other people more space. I was pushing too hard, and I think I've managed to create a better balance in that respect. And probably the person that's changed the most in the last few years is probably me. I probably needed to, frankly, but the point being was it's often you're looking for change in others, if you will, but actually it starts with you. And I think I needed that leadership MOT, which is what your program gave me. And the problem is at that point in my career, some bad habits had really set in, and it takes quite a lot to unwind some of those. But therefore, things like buying green books has helped me. I managed to find a management team around me that had been magnificent, leadership team around me that had been magnificent. And then since then, interesting enough, we've run a nice business now for 7 years in a row, but actually the growth has actually accelerated. We've changed nothing apart from the culture in the business. Products the same, markets the same, competitor sets the same. All we've changed is just how we've gone about the business, and it's just got a little bit easier every year, a little bit better. And that, I think, is because it started with me, and then I found people they've also accepted me for what I am because they understand what I am. And that sort of tolerance and understanding, that comes through sort of, trust and relationship building, which is obviously, without giving too many secrets away, day one of your program, which is understanding each other more, because I don't think you can fundamentally change yourself. You can understand yourself better and you can round off a few rough edges, but you are what you are, because that makes you your strengths and sometimes your weaknesses.
Yeah, I don't mind people. I think a lot of people who are on here will be people who've done the program, and people who haven't, I'm really happy for them to know a bit about it. But I know that I find it so interesting. So that very early on exercise, sharing a bit about who we are, and the questions for those that haven't done it before are really simple. It's just tell us a bit about who you are. And that doesn't just mean, I've been senior manager in this position in this company, and it's not all about background stuff. It can be, well, I'm married and I've got 11 children and 23 dogs, and I travel to Barbados. It doesn't matter, but it's sharing a bit about who you are. And then it's asking, share 3 things in your life that really you appreciate about your life. And that can be success. It can just be, God, I really value X, Y, Z. What's the biggest challenge or opportunity you're facing in your life right now? And people sometimes share work ones, and they sometimes share home ones. Be it, I've got a teenage child who's being a right pain in the butt and I don't know how to deal with it. It seems to be constant rows or whatever. And what are 3 things that you want to take from these first 2 days? And what are 3 things you want to give? And those questions sound really simple ones, but the impact that we've seen it have is absolutely mind-blowing. And even when you've had people who have been in the same team for quite a while suddenly realize they didn't know the people. And the best leaders I know, and you've just actually said it in when you were phrasing it then, the best leaders I know that to have a successful team, the first thing you have to have is trust. How the hell do you have trust if you don't know the people you're working with? All you know is that superficial something, but you don't know who they are. You don't know some of the challenges they might be experiencing in their life at home with that pain in the arse teenager or whatever it happens to be. And it absolutely staggers me. And I'd be curious, having worked in the big corporates you've worked in, how many of those corporates understood the importance of really knowing the people and helping them build trust. Without trust, I don't believe you can have a good team ever.
I agree.
So I'd be curious to know. I mean, I do think the impact of that is amazing. But when you've been in the big corporates, how often have they ever done anything like that?
Well, they haven't really. And the other problem in big corporates is everyone's moving jobs all the time. So there's a sort of revolving door where the teams never, I mean, and interesting enough, but having said, sorry, to finish the sentence, you never feel like it's stable enough. It feels like the class is always changing, if you will. But actually at the real level in the organization, it's much more stable than people think it is. And you have always got time. So the Excalibur journey has been interesting. We've had the odd, up and down on the way. It hasn't been an absolute straight line. And what's interesting is I would say we wobbled a bit a couple of years ago, and it took us about 12 months to get it right again. But it's 12 months, not 3 years, 4 years. But it wasn't 1 month. But it's doable. So I think in most corporations, if you will, I think it's an acceptable period of time to get a much better team. But as you know, Penny, trust does not build overnight. And like all these habits, it takes a while to establish. But I mean, I'm a big fan of Lencioni as well, and that's the foundation of all of his books, which is unless you've got that, you've got nothing.
Yeah, and I never really know how you can build trust unless you find a way of getting people to be comfortable enough to open up and show who they really are. And that's a scary place. And for me, one of the most important things of leadership is having the courage to be vulnerable.
I agree. And to be honest, when you've made as many gaffes as I have in my life, I don't find that difficult. Funny enough, other people do. I think that's been. It's interesting. What I learned on this journey, though, is people confuse trust with like. In teams, you don't have to love and admire everyone. They haven't all got to be your friends. And I think one of the issues now, I've got a great team at the moment, and some relationships are naturally strong, right? They are friends in and outside work. Other ones, they've got a trustworthy relationship. They probably have some personality characteristics that aren't perfectly matched, but they respect each other enough to trust each other. And I think people confuse often trust with a sort of family sense. In a work context, it's trust in the sense of you don't have to have Christmas Day together, but you just need to know that when you've shown humility or you've asked someone to do something, you're not sitting there kind of worrying they're going to do it or not. I think it's worth unpicking the word trust again. Then people confuse that with like or admire or whatever. And you don't need that. You just need mutual respect and trust.
God, I think that's an incredibly important point. How would you go about explaining that and having a team understand that, Peter? Because I think what you've hit is a really important point.
And well, we've had a few here where I think you have to just sort of point that out to people, which is, it's only when you get to the point where you just got to sort of explain the difference, because I think people confuse it. And normally speaking, when teams aren't getting on, if you cannot build trust having tried for a period, you've normally got to sort of confront that and sit down with both of them together or individually, whatever, and point it out. But most of the time, if there's absolute lack of professional credibility or a person's performing weakly or whatever, that's a different issue. In this, the examples in my head at the moment, recently with here, there wasn't lack of performance. It was just they looked at the world very differently. And often it was around, emotional intelligence, or they just saw the world differently. One was an extrovert, one was an introvert. And I'm making some of the examples up so they can't be kind of pointed backwards. And until you understand that, I'm not a huge fan of the Myers-Briggs stuff. But until you understand that people are very different to each other and how they tick, you're not going to get very far, because people do process the same information differently.
Just tell me, Peter, this is probably a bit of an interesting question for you. You, in the last X amount of years, have been CEO.
Yeah.
So you can go in and you can help build that trust in that team from that senior position. If you've got somebody who is not at that level, okay, they can be 1 or 2 levels down, and they're part of a team where they feel there isn't trust, how do you think they might be able to tackle the issue when they're not the boss of that team?
I think more often than not, people just sort of quietly sit there under their breath and moan about it, unless you're prepared to actually, again, back to craft earlier, if we didn't have decent working relationships with people, we were sat in a room together and we both gave each other constructive feedback, if you will. And at the time, we didn't want to do it, but it 7 or 8 out of 10 of times solved the issue to an acceptable level. It might have still meant that they weren't your best friend in the organization, but you went from having an unhelpful working relationship, lack of trust, to adequate levels of trust, if you will. But I think the only way we can do that is actually confront the issue, sit in a room and make sure that both parties understand each other. And more often than not, organizations, people walk around those issues and try and pretend that it doesn't really exist. And for me, lower on down the organization, unless that person's prepared to sit with the other individual and work it through, it's not going to resolve. What normally happens is they go complaining to their boss about it.
Yeah. And the worst bit is then when the boss gets involved, rather than saying, you need to deal with that.
And it's been weaponized by that point, and it's suddenly 2 bosses are involved and blah, blah, blah. And it's he says, she says type thing. And it's just having that culture where people are prepared to, there's a nice expression from an all black hooker called Sean Fitzpatrick. I love it. And it says, in my belly, not my back. And the All Blacks, which is this most staggeringly successful team, but their whole culture is built around, give it to my face, tell me direct, don't put it in my back.
Yeah, I can still remember, and having now being qualified to deliver the program, you will maybe have even experienced this, but I can still remember there was a group CEO over in Belgium, a group finance director over in Belgium, and a CEO of one of the divisions who was up north, CEO of the factory, one of the factories, and they had real conflict. And I got them together. I got the group finance director to come over, and I took them in a room, and I had a timer that I set for 3 minutes. And I said, okay, for 3 minutes, one of you, you go first and say what you think and feel about what's happening here and about the individual, whatever you want to say. No notes. You can't make any notes. I'm going to remember that point and come back on that one. If you don't remember, it wasn't important in the first place. So no notes, no nothing, just really, really listening. And then when the timer goes, 3 minutes the other way, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes, 3 minutes. And I'm not kidding. This went on, I think it must have been not that far off 3 hours. I had to come in twice, once to do a testing understanding because I thought they hadn't got a common understanding, and once to ask an incisive question. Other than that, that was all I did. And I still remember the group CEO must phone me probably about 4 weeks later. And he said, Pen, what magic dust have you been sprinkling this time? How come these two were at each other's throats and now best of friends? I said, it was really, really tough, Scott. I got them to listen to each other.
Yeah.
And it's crazy because so often we make assumptions about how the other person are thinking and feeling because of what they've said. The assumptions aren't right. Or they are, but we've misunderstood them because we've got a different set of beliefs. And getting people just to be able to do it that way. But if you really have 2 people in the team then who are having problems, then I think at times maybe you as the more experienced person needs to facilitate it, but only facilitate it, not get stuck in.
Correct. No, it's the one, I think it's at most when it starts happening, it's sort of, these are the ones that if you don't deal with, they really end up in tears. And if I had reflections on the last few, these are always the ones when you've solved them, you feel super chuffed that it's solved for all parties involved. But normally you regret you didn't do it sooner and nip it in the bud quicker.
I know it is an interesting one. I still think that it's a bit of a challenge, and we've sort of wandered off the point of it. I've taken you off a bit. How do you get somebody to try and challenge upwards and saying we're not a team, we're a group of individuals, we're not a team? How the heck can you get somebody to challenge upwards?
Well, we do. It's interesting. I mean, it's a great question. I think so what we do every year is the leaders of this organization, it's a 60-person IT and telecom business, people are interested, based in Swindon, and we each take each other's teams. So we share it around. So the finance director will go and talk to the sales team one-to-one. And we ask them two questions. One is, what do you think we should do, as in the board? So, you've got a chance to sit in the boardroom for a moment going, right, what are we not doing that we should do? Which is, they love that question. And the second question is, what could they do to help the organization more, if you will? And until, I think, what we found is that is an annual ritual. And we do that before we write the plan for the year. So the plan for the year that we then share with them is informed by their feedback. So we're sort of making sure we're all rowing in the same direction. Obviously, that's a lot of content for 60 people, so you just have to fine tune it. But what we found is we call them skip sessions. And what we found is that they generally, if you listen correctly, you will pick up mood and morale quite quickly. And then you'll understand whether the team is or isn't working and where the difficult relationships are, because it's two questions. But like you just said, it's a half an hour conversation. It's a lot more than two questions. And then they'll start pointing out relationships in the company that aren't working or teams that aren't working well together. And then that gives you the ability to kind of fix it. Yes, you can walk the floor and everything else, but I think you've got to make sure that leaders are down there at ground level and listening, not just walking around waving, but actually going listening to people.
Yeah. So I do feel that I need to ask you, because your life is changing a little bit.
A little bit, yeah.
Yes. So I think it would be nice if you shared as much as you feel comfortable sharing about how your life's changing, because I am then very curious to ask you. I asked you your vision 10 years ago. What's your vision now for the next 10 years?
Yeah. So obviously, whilst we've been knowing each other, I've recently completed the sale of this business, which completes the next few months. And so we're very much in the middle of the transition on that at the moment. So I'm definitely not sort of out remotely, but I think, and I've been very clear with the staff, that we'll be part of a larger organization called OneCom. It's a sort of much bigger version of what we are. It was the right time for me and the organization to transition from being a sort of very, very nice small business to we're joining a successful business, and we're bringing lots of skills and assets, including a wonderful team, to that organization, and they're at a good stage in their journey. So that's just completed a few weeks ago, and we've got a few more months to kind of get ready for that transition. So I'm not remotely out yet, and I'm still intending to kind of stay closely involved in everything else. But I think I've got one more hill to climb in my life, and it's this really, which is I would like to spend the last chapter of my career becoming a bit more of a portfolio person around leadership, and ideally trying to work out how I could help create some more Excaliburs, companies that are well run, sustainably growing, but growing based on letting people really, we have on our wall outside, we want to be famous, not good, famous for customer and staff engagement. And we've wedded ourselves to those two things. And I'm not saying it'll be the same in every company, but I'd like to do it again, but I'd like to do it across a broader range of portfolio clients. So I'm right in the middle of working out how I transition into that. That's the goal, is to become even deeper in leadership, but probably leadership and coaching through other organizations rather than necessarily running one 5 days a week.
That sounds great. I've just had something. Sorry, I have to do this. Message from Christine. Great to hear your thoughts again, Peter, and hear your news. Congratulations.
Oh, that's very kind. Well, Christine, don't forget, trained me to be a living leader trainer, so she's absolutely welcome.
I know.
She put up with me training in COVID. We had to sort of sit there with masks across the board table, learning how to do training courses. But I'm very happy to hear her again.
Yeah, I do actually need to say, and sorry, I forgot to put it at the beginning. If anybody here has got questions for Peter, or any comments or questions, things that they might like to ask him, do put it up. I can read it if I put my specs back on. So please do put them up. So, Peter, that sounds amazing. And obviously we hope that we're going to be doing quite a lot of work with you. Let me ask you a couple of other cheeky, silly questions.
Sure.
You're feeling really quite happy that you've built a good team in Excalibur, and it sounds like you've done a really good job. If they had to describe you with 3 words, what 3 words, how do you think they'd describe you?
Oh, God.
I have to tell you, the reason I ask you this is when I was over in Australia, joining the Scholars Group, the Marketing Academy, I'm not kidding, they asked me that question. They asked me some other follow-ons, and I thought, thank you, Adrian. And I thought, oh my God, I don't know how to answer that. So I thought, I'm sure you're going to be better at this than me. So what 3 words, how do you think your team would describe you?
Passionate, I think. I lead with my heart on my sleeve. I sort of swear too much, and I'm a bit too sort of, I'm not very polished. I tried to become polished years ago and didn't work very well. So I ended up going back to what I do best. So passionate, relentless. They need to learn that with me, which is I just keep going. And I've had to accept that some people aren't quite as relentless necessarily as I am, and it's probably perfectly acceptable, but I'm sort of, I just keep going until I get where I roughly need to be. So that's a positive and a negative. And then, on my best days, I can be sort of good fun, and I'm sort of, I guess, fun, hopefully. But I think, work is such an important part of your life. You should enjoy it. And if you're not enjoying it and you're sitting there in silence just to earn X pounds an hour to go home, it's just tragic. I've been really lucky. I've loved working, and I've loved working because I've loved working around people. And I know it's a cliche, but you should enjoy doing it. Not every minute of every day, but if you don't get real fun and enjoyment out of it, it's the most important parts of your life in terms of your awake hours. Why wouldn't you want to find something you enjoy?
Yeah, and I'm afraid that I meet too many people in the workplace who do it for the money and they don't enjoy it.
Yeah.
And I don't believe you ever do a good job if you don't enjoy it. I think it's really, really important. Right, I'll now make it even more fun for you.
Sure.
If your wife and your children had to describe you with 3 words, how would they describe you?
Well, definitely relentless would feature again. Do you know what? They see all sides of me, and so they probably see. I don't think it's wildly different, which I think is important.
Yeah,
I think they see probably the day-to-day stresses and strains more than maybe my team does, and they see the ups and downs, because being either reasonably senior in an organization or owning your own business comes with an enormous amount of day-to-day pressure, basically, and they see that bit. But I think that sort of ability to sort of handle the ups and downs in life, so that, I don't know how to put that into a word, resilient maybe rather than sort of relentless, which is they've watched me go up and go down and just manage this, smooth that one out. But no, I'm pretty much the same guy at home as I am at work. And I think that's important. I don't like distinctions. I think integrity is really important to me. And I think you have to be what you are. Yeah.
And that takes courage. It comes back to what I was saying earlier, that you need to have the courage to be vulnerable.
Yeah. I remember I was a guy when I was at Unilever, and they said, Pete, to be more successful, you need to be more like that guy over there who's called John. I won't mention his surname. And John was a nice guy, and I knew him reasonably well, but I tried to be like John, and I couldn't be like John. So it was pointless. And John was really polished, and he was very polite, and and it's like, yeah, great, can do all that as well. But that's not my natural personality. So I think I'm going to stick to be who I am, actually.
I find it really interesting that anybody could tell you to be like somebody else. That to me, and you're saying that was a teacher?
No, it was at Unilever. So it was a boss.
That was a boss.
My peak personal development to be more successful. It was well intentioned. They were they had a sort of stereotype of this is what a successful executive looks like, and I'm all for a bit of smoothing off a few edges, but you are what you are, and people have got strengths and weaknesses and everything else. But it was one of those, it's a bit like my senior school where there was a bit too much of a stereotype of the sorts of persons that succeeded, and I think this is years ago, Penny, but it's horrifying. Yeah. Then you end up hiring those people. They're the ones that get promoted. And you're in this, it's a bit GE-like. You end up getting in this self-fulfilling prophecy. And then that's before we get to diversity of any description. You end up with this sort of this monotonous sort of type of person. And everyone looks the same. It's dreadful.
No, and as you say, done with the best intentions in the world, but not really understanding. So now I know that we don't believe in giving advice, but if you wanted to share with people here 3 things that you maybe took from the program and have built on, 3 things that you think if they just put their attention on even one of those 3 things, what would those 3 things be? And if you want a moment to think about it, that's fine.
Yeah, I might need a moment. 3 things. I think doing the introductions on day 1,
yeah,
and not just doing it once, but reflecting on what you said and what you might have said, and sort of getting the story on your life together and understanding that. That's 1 for me, because you can. And I've trained the course now, and some people give you 5 minutes, some people give you 50 minutes on it. It's an exaggeration, but and you can see some people really go there and some people don't. And I just think you've got to get to a point where you understand kind of what's going on, because more often than not, when I hear the stories of other people, when you understand where they've come from, it explains a lot. So I think really investing in understanding who you are and where you've come from is important. I think secondly, on the course and I'm not criticizing the course, but it's a tiny bit of the course around the whole beliefs and behaviors point. And I've now done it 6 times, right? I've been on it, I've trained it, and I've trained it 4 times. And the penny has dropped, and I now really understand it. And there are certain bits of the course that just wash over you, and they're quite interesting, but you have to go again and again and again until you really understand it. And that bit, because it's sort of, this is deep psychology now. And I think that you opened that door for me, but luckily I've now managed to walk through it a few times. So that bit of the course is, you only give a little introduction or a starter menu, if you will. And that's one to really invest in, I think, because only when you start understanding a few of those that you really get underneath the skin of it.
How could you give a bit more insight into what exactly it is? You say you've got it. How can you give a bit more insight into that, Peter?
I think until you start understanding some subconscious beliefs that you make them from subconscious to conscious, then you can start to understand it. So the example I give on this one for now is one of the best gifts of my life is I had 2 lovely parents who were incredibly happily married, and they never argued once in their marriage, not once. Wow. Which is lovely, right? Everyone goes, isn't that amazing? Okay. Yeah. So that's a belief for me. I'm also happily married, and I adore my wife, and I met her when I was 4 years old, which was legal, don't get me wrong. But the point being was, it's the best gift in my life. So that plays through, okay? But my weakness as a leader is sometimes I don't confront conflict well enough. And then you go back to, well, where's that all coming from? It's because I probably value too highly harmony and sort of not arguing, if you will, and I don't do conflict and confrontation very well. And I've had to learn that that was a belief. I knew one bit of it, I didn't know the shadow of it, if you will. And that's now helped me realize that that's why I was sometimes just not saying what I wanted to say in certain instances, because I just don't like conflict. And by the way, when surprising on this call, have I had an argument with my wife? No, I haven't. So it's a really strong value on opinion, whatever, of me, but I have to understand in certain contexts that's going to hold you back. And until you understand things like that are happening then you start to understand the model. Before that, the model is just a model.
Okay, that's really interesting. And I should think that's given a few people who are listening some things to think about there. Okay, that's really interesting. Okay, so what else might you share with people?
And I think the third one, I think, is just the vision point about where are you going and why. And I think, I don't know about your course, and we've gone down to very young people in the organization. We're training people in their early 20s, and everyone's like, but Pete, I'm not a leader. I'm like, let me define leadership. Have you got influence? Yes. So we've done 3/4 of the firm now, which I'm really proud of. But I'm assuming most of your people on the program are in their kind of mid 30s to kind of, and maybe sort of 35 to 40. I'm assuming, I don't know, if they're sort of middle leaders. And I think just spending some time understanding what do you really want to, work towards, because that lack of vision or direction, if you will, most people in the business just didn't have it, as you know. And I think spending some time on that, understanding that with your friends and family, with your work colleagues is important, because once you get a bit more of a sense of that, your day-to-day engagement and satisfaction lifts almost instantly, because what you're working towards, even if it's a long way away, you're doing it, something that's important to you.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on. And we've had another comment. I've got my glasses back on again, from Rebecca, saying, so insightful. Thank you for sharing your belief and behavior, Peter.
Happy to do that. And there's more where that came from, but I tried to bring an example, Penny, which was the model's only, like a lot of your models, it's only really going to stick when you can personalize it and you understand how it's playing back into your world. Otherwise, and that's the danger of the course, there's quite a lot of angles to look at it. And I had this wonderful teacher at school, and before I went to university, and he said, Pete, if you leave a lecture and you've learned 2 or 3 new things in 1 hour, it's worth doing. And I use that for Living Leader. If on the back of Living Leader, people change 2 or 3 things permanently in how they look at the world, they can throw the rest in the bin. It's fine. That's 3 fantastic things. And I think people try and consume too much and get lost trying to do too many different things. Pick a few things and make them stick.
Yeah, and I think that's absolutely right. Would you be interested to know the 3 things that I would like to leave? And funnily enough, they're actually all different. The first one that I'd say to people is really take on board that you have no control over and keep thinking all the time about what you choose to give. So let go of what people think about you. The fear, the nervousness. Well, I can't ask that question. What will somebody think about me? People think I'm stupid. You have no control over get. Focus on give. And really think, I'm going to give that person the time. I'm going to give that person a bit of acknowledgement. I'm going to, whatever it is. And for me, I think that was something that stuck for me so hard, because as I've said to people, I designed the program, but it was only as I was running it that I really began to deeply understand leadership. Your journey of delivering the program is constantly expanding. You're learning about leadership, and it was for me, and I designed the darn thing. So it's crazy. So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, it's very easy, and this comes back to what you were saying about beliefs and behaviors. We look for evidence to prove that how we think and feel is right. We don't do it consciously. So if you meet somebody and they do something that irritates you, and and you don't like it, you meet them again, they do something else that irritates you, you will then only look for the things that irritate you. That's all you'll look for, because it'll reinforce the belief that they're irritating. And I think that learning to look for what people do well, really think about it. It doesn't matter who it is. It could be somebody who's serving you in Tesco's and they're on the till and they smile. Notice it and tell them, lovely to be greeted by somebody who smiles. Thank you. In the workplace, stop looking for what people are doing wrong. Really look for little things they're doing well. Because if you look for things that people do well, you'll see more of them. And the most important thing is you don't just look for them, you see them and you tell them, however small they are.
Yeah.
Because people begin to feel better about themselves, and in feeling better about themselves, guess what? They perform better. That's what can shift culture very fast. And the other thing I'd say is learn to listen. We think we're good at listening. We're not. Start listening. We're in our heads thinking, what advice do I need to give now? How do I need to, and all of our thinking goes on while that person's sharing their thoughts with us. Learning to listen and really listen, I think, is a skill. And I still screw up. I'm still in my head, especially when one of my children says something and I think, oh God, they need to do that. It's really hard to let go of it. Really listening is really hard. It's why that 3 minutes each way works so well.
Yep.
So that's the 3 things I would share. Anything that you'd like to now add, Peter? I don't know how we're doing for time. Oh, we still got a little bit of time.
No, I think, well, the only thing I'd add on that one is when you boil the program down, you get to, I mean, some of it's a little bit more complicated, like beliefs and behaviors, I think it's a bit more chewy, but things like showing people some more appreciation, the whole gratitude point, the whole listening point, and they're not difficult to explain to people, but we've all got into bad habits. And that sometimes everyone's like, well, that's obvious, Pete. I already do that. And it's like, do you really? And I think the only thing I would say on that I've noticed is, again, I've said it enough times in this call, you can't fundamentally change, but if you move it 5 or 10 degrees left or right, it makes a big difference. And I think sometimes people think they have to kind of go from here to all over here. And no, you just need to, like listening. Some people are naturally amazing at it, but if you're a bad listener, become an okay listener. You might not be the best listener, but you can take it from being a weakness to sort of suddenly be neutral, and you will feel the difference and people feel the difference instantly. So marginal gains is undercalling it, but I think small subtle changes make a big difference. And in my experience on the program, I think people are sometimes looking for too many big silver bullets, if you will. And actually it's a number of quite small, subtle, but important permanent changes make a profound difference.
Yeah. No, I think you're absolutely right. And you said earlier how you really think in Excalibur that you got increased performance in lots of ways, and the only thing you changed was the culture. How do you think the team are feeling about losing you? How strong do you think that team now is now?
Well, I mean, that's a good one. I think we're in the middle of that transition at the moment. So there's a bit of a sort of, until they find the new world that they're going to be in necessarily. So candidly, I think at the moment that's, we look back on some good positive growth and memories, if you will, but I think I'll only know that in about 6 months to 12 months time. At the moment, it's all a bit new and a bit raw. Until you've transitioned into and moved it across, I'm not sitting there now. And in fact, I'm well and truly in the office, still driving the business forward. So I think it's important that this is another leadership moment to get it right. So at the moment, I'm very proud of the last 6-7 years, but it's getting that finish correctly done so that we move into the new organization well and correctly. It's very important to me.
How long are you going to stay as part of it?
As long as they want me. I mean, there's obviously a natural cycle. What you don't want to have is the previous business owner knocking around going, if I was you, I would do that. That's what everyone doesn't want. But I'm going to be happy when the team that I built and the culture I built transitioned across. So that's got many months and quarters to go, if you will. So now, again, like like leadership, you stay on the pitch as a leader until it's done, and it's not done yet.
How do you think that you said that you want to continue learning and growing? What do you think for you are the things that you'd still like to keep learning?
Well, you mentioned listening, and I'm probably more in the mentor than I am, or I want to go for more from. There's too many bad life coaches out there, but that's a different conversation for a different day. I'd like to become more of a coach than a mentor. I probably still push more than pull, if you will, in that sense. That's, yeah, to be simple, that's the one where I can sort of just slow down a bit and accept that when you're in more of a sort of non-exec, when you're a bit more arm's length, you've got to encourage people to get there themselves rather than keep giving them fish. You've got to sort of basically teach them how to kind of think for themselves. That's probably the one thing, and I'm therefore thinking about courses later on this year and everything else to sort of do that. I don't want to be a life coach. I want to basically be heavily involved in businesses and help them transform and change and grow. But that coach muscle, it's better, but it's still not where it needs to be.
How do you think you'll find it? Because one of the things that comes across to me loud and clear is that you care about developing a team, you care about building a business, you care about all of that. How are you going to feel when it's not your responsibility and you're just advising is the wrong word, but you know what I mean by that?
And well, it's a great question. And funny enough, I spoke to a friend of mine recently who's got a very successful marketing consultancy. And I said, how do you handle that, David? I've known him for many years. And he said, Pete, you cannot, in the end, you cannot control what they do with the outputs of what you do. You need to take pride in how you get there, how you work with them, but you have to kind of let go of the final execution because it's not yours anymore. And I'm still learning that, if I'm honest, and it's not that I needed the ego and the vanity of seeing it was my result, but I've been able to sort of watch things go from an idea into execution, if you will, whether that's people, teams, products, or whatever. And suddenly now you are at an arm's length, and I have to step back, and I think you have to probably reframe what gives you satisfaction is watching growth in others and watching them value what you do, but you're not in control of the end to end anymore.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting because you're almost your practice field is going to be with your existing team.
Correct.
That's going to be a really interesting bit of the journey for you to do that.
And I think you therefore have to revalue other bits differently. But the results bit, you're going to have to measure your results further up the chain in the sense of, did you conduct that exercise well? Did they value it? Was it on time? Was it well delivered? Did it have lots of team? But whether it worked or not in the marketplace, or the team was high performing or not, to a certain extent, that is then out of your control.
Yeah, that's going to be an interesting bit of the journey, I suspect, Peter.
I reckon.
I have to be honest, it's not one I'd be very comfortable with.
Well,
but
the problem is you need to, if you're not prepared to let go like that, you're going to sort of live an unhappy life, if you will. So I've just got to somehow reframe it. I'm aware of it, and I've spoken to other people who have done it, and they've come to terms with it because their responsibility levels are different now.
Yeah. So Peter, I think that we're just about at the end. Is there anything that you think I could have asked you and I haven't?
No, I think you've gone there where I thought you might not have gone, which is good. But I know the program well and I like it. So hopefully that's been useful for people listening to it. I'm
sure they will. And Peter, if anybody would like to contact you after this to either ask more questions or say would be interested in having a conversation with you, where would you like them to contact you?
LinkedIn's fine. I'll get it on LinkedIn if you want. Sort of easier. Bear in mind they're looking at this mostly through LinkedIn. Just message me on LinkedIn. It's fine. Okay. So would you be happy for Katie to share an email as well if anybody wants to email you? Yeah, no, of course. I'll do that separate. It's fine. Yeah. That would be amazing. So, Peter, thank you. It's been a pleasure talking to you. Can't believe the hour's gone already. It all happened so quickly. Exactly. But it's been a real pleasure. And I think I'd like to say that I
not just thank you, but I think you've given some really useful insights that people can take away with them. So thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Penny. We'll stay in touch. Thanks a lot.
Bye.